how are you doing? I haven't spoken to you since, I'm going to take a guess, 7 years? Does that sound right?
Yeah, maybe 2018,
Yeah.
2019. Yeah.
All right. 6 to 7 years. Um, we haven't spoken since. I don't know what you're up to. I do appreciate that you're willing to do this podcast. I'd love to hear kind of what you've been up to, how the story's unfolded. Last time we chatted, you were working for a well-known investment bank on Wall Street in New York. I'm going to take a guess you're probably not doing that anymore.
I'm not,
Um,
no.
yeah, I'd love to sort of hear all about it. So, because this is a podcast format, Samantha, I mean, so you were an HBA student of mine. You graduated, can you remind me what year? I'm actually getting too old to remember.
2017.
Okay, so you graduated 2017. I remember you being kind of hardcore finance, for an undergrad, at least enthusiastic about finance.
Yeah.
Um, and then you go off, you get a bunch of offers, you take one of them. I see you out in New York when I'm visiting NYU. That is our last chat, and I have no idea what you've been up to since. How have you been? What's the journey been like? And what are you doing now?
Yeah, it's been good. I feel like I've gone through a rapid iteration process to figure out what I want to do. And I've tried a bunch of things since banking. I think the kind of long story short is I went from banking into late stage private equity investing, and then kind of took a pretty sharp pivot and then worked in strategic finance at a Series D startup focused on healthcare tech. Um, then I realized that that was all fine and good, but then I wanted to be closer to kind of the executive level decision making. So then I switched to a smaller startup. It was Series B at the time. And I ran the finance division and I worked really closely with the founder. And then I realized that, I wanted to go to an even smaller startup. So I went to a seed stage startup, also in healthcare tech. And I was their first business hire. And then I think the final iteration of this was, hey, I just want to start my own startup. So I've been a founder for the last year and a half.
Okay, so this was all. By the way, that was a beautiful. That's a wonderful interview answer. The way that you've kind of done this. I want to go back to. There's always a human side to this kind of story, and I feel like when sort of hitting the bullet points, that tends to get skipped over. Let's start back to when I actually knew you as a student. You were enthusiastic about finance. I remember that. What were you thinking your path was going to be at that time? Was it that you were going to be running a healthcare startup by this age? I'm going to take a guess, no. So,
Yeah.
what were you thinking at that point?
Mm, when I was 21, 22, just about to graduate. I actually remember you and I had a couple of talks about this, about how I would approach the rest of my career. And I guess I was uncertain, but it felt to me that I would be something in finance because that's where I was going to start off. Um, and I think I was wrestling with the fact that, was I really good at it? Did I really like it? Is this the one career path for me? But if I had to guess back then, I would imagine I would be doing something in finance. And now I'm very far from it. Um, yeah, so I guess like my mindset has shifted pretty greatly, like every step of the way. So I've learned a lot.
And what originally made you think that finance was for you? I'm really asking for the benefit of the audience. I think I have some ideas, but what was it? Just you got good grades in the class, and you're like, this is something I'm good at, I think, or was there something that resonated with you when you looked at financial statements?
I think I was listening to a couple of other episodes of your podcast, and I think it's what a couple other folks said too. I feel like going through undergrad, there is a um, element of like social hierarchy when it comes to jobs, and there are definitely jobs that are more prestigious than other jobs. So I think when you're an impressionable 19, 20-year-old, You want to run at a goal that feels fulfilling and feels socially validated. So that was kind of it for me. I wanted to have an ambitious goal, and I felt like that one just kind of presented itself in our environment. But I think there's elements of like the job that I like and elements that I don't. Yeah.
Okay. So so it could be as simple as a story of, hey, I'm an ambitious person. I'm told this is what ambitious people do,
Yes.
and therefore I'm going to do what you've told me ambitious people do. And that is go get a job in investment bank. I cannot judge you because I've been through exactly the same thing. So then you get to New York, you work at the bank. You said there are some things you liked, some things you didn't like. Can you talk about that? Like what is it that you ended up discovering you liked? Was it what you thought it was? Because in school there must have been an impression you had in your head about what that would be like. And then when you got there, did the reality match the impression?
Mm, in some ways, in some ways. I think what I really liked about it was with a group of people that were equally ambitious. Some of my Evercore classmates are still my closest friends today. That was like a really amazing experience to have in my early 20s. Everyone worked really hard. Most people were also like the type of people that I wanted to have around, like really hardworking, really kind, really thoughtful. Um, like it was busy, but in a good way. So I think got to see a lot of deal flow, which I guess like conventionally, when you're looking at an investment banking job, you want to pick a group that like does deals, you sees a lot of transactions, like you get the reps. So did get that experience for sure. I think the things that really bothered me were kind of the structural components of the job. Like it was very hierarchical. You follow what your associate says, your associate reports up to the VP, who reports up to the MD. And I felt like we were doing a lot of work because somewhere along the chain someone said to do this, versus was it really accomplishing a goal? Did it really move the ball forward? And I would come back a lot to this idea of like, am I actually doing something that like makes an impact, or am I doing something like pushing the peas around because someone with like a higher like title told me to? So I think it bothered me a bit that there wasn't as much thought as there was kind of just like execution in the actual role itself. And also the hours got pretty grueling after a bit. I think it's okay when you're like 22 and you don't really have anything going on, but I felt like a couple of years of like running hard and staying past like 9 p.m. every day kind of really gets to you. Those are the pros and cons.
Okay, interesting. Um, just so I understand a little, because you've never told me details about your banking experience, and everyone's is a little bit different to some degree. You mentioned hierarchy being one of the sticking points for you. Is it true that no one asked you what you thought about whatever you were working on, that you were essentially just told to do things all the time?
I think in terms of pure like efficiency, it's actually easier if you don't ask questions. You know, if your goal was just to do a good job by like the assessment standards and to get out of your chair as fast as possible, it's actually easier if you don't ask strategic questions. You can ask questions like, oh, like, did you mean this or did you mean that to produce like the right slide or the right changes? Um, but I think asking the higher level questions doesn't really get you anywhere when you're closer to the bottom of the totem pole.
Got it. Okay, I think that did answer the question. So I'm imagining you in a meeting with your associate, your VP, and the MD, and they're chatting back and forth about stuff. And at no point is the MD turning into you and saying, Samantha, wait a second, what do you think about this? Should we go this way or this way with this? Like, there's no, you're the one that's closest to the numbers, right? No one is saying that to you. Is that fair?
Yeah. And it's not
Okay.
to paint the team in a bad light. I think that's just kind of the structure of
Yep.
it all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would say that was also one of the disappointments I had with it because when you're a student, you don't understand that the hierarchy puts you literally at the bottom and that you're actually not going to be asked what your opinion is about any of that stuff, right? So you're nor is your analytical muscle really used that intensely. At least that was my experience, right? So Got it. So that was your experience, not super satisfying in certain respects, and so you move on to private equity. Very logical move,
Yes.
right? Probably the least shocking move I can imagine
Yeah.
coming out of banking. Was that what you thought it would be, or was it again like, like it? I know it's the next logical thing, but this wasn't kind of what I thought it'd be. How did it feel?
Yeah, I think the transition was it was pretty dramatic for me. The way that I describe it is, I think in banking, like if you just do what you're told, it feels manageable, especially because it's mostly execution. I think the big shift from banking to private equity for me was there was a ton more responsibility, and it was kind of up to you to like get everything done. Like we had live deals, we had portfolio companies. The team was really thin. And no one was really there to check your work. Like you kind of had to get the answer out right, get the answer out quickly. If you were on vacation, no one was covering your file. So it really felt like a level up in terms of kind of ownership. That was cool, but also like very, very scary. And I think when you're just working with like large numbers, like the fund that we were at, um, there was an adjustment period. I was definitely very stressed. I think the first year into private equity, to the point where I asked myself, is this something that I'm going to adjust to? Like, do I really like this? Do I see myself doing this for 10 years and trying to get, like, climb the ladder, basically? And that was kind of the first time where I, like, really took a step back to look around, because it felt like I wasn't compared, like, I wasn't in love with the job, and it definitely was a very hard job. So it really got me
Hmm.
thinking.
Okay. So you, I want to make sure I have the ages right. You graduated at age 22, is that right, Samantha? Give or take?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
something.
By the time you get to this moment of revelation, when you're in the private equity job plus 1 year, how old are you?
24.
Okay, so by 24, roughly right about in time for what we would call a quarter life crisis, right?
Yeah.
Assuming you make it to 100. So this starts to hit you. Now looking back, do you feel like that you had a lot of guidance of how to handle a situation like that beforehand? Or so in other words, I'm not even going to try to say was there anyone at Ivy? I know that there probably wasn't, but but afterwards, were there people that sort of said, like if we're talking about you as a human being, there are these needs that you might have, like you may find these to be somewhat unsatisfying, because the polar opposite is basically like you're working in banking and you're like, oh, I don't like this that much. What's the next thing I'm supposed to do? And literally, you just get told private equity, right? Which is part of the reason why I think a lot of people, and to be fair, the comp is there, right? The
Hmm.
prestige is there. So it's not like there's no rational reason, but it may not be rational if you factor in things like emotions, right? And a bunch of other things. It requires more than just, well, that's just what I'm told people do. So if round one was you're told ambitious people do this and you said sign me up, and then private equity I didn't ask you if that repeated again for your decision making model, but it could have played a role there, maybe less of one. By this time though, you're really starting to question it, it sounds like. So what are you thinking then, instead of, well, what people do in your shoes is X, right? And then signing up again. I'm guessing by this point you're not jumping for that one necessarily.
Yeah. So I think the fact, like that's definitely true. So when I was going through banking, the logical step is to recruit for private equity, and that's kind of what I did. So I felt like I was still going with the flow, especially because I think it's a very structured recruiting process. Like if you don't go with the flow and recruit, like when it's time to recruit, you could be left behind. So there was definitely an element of like FOMO, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and then when I got to private equity, I kind of looked around and thought, all the things that I just told you, but everyone else was gearing up to either, find a VP job, like direct promote, or to apply to business school. So it just felt like it was the same motion. It's like, guys, this is the next thing, it's going to be so much better. Like everyone do your GMATs. Um, but I think that's when the pattern recognition came in for me a little bit. And I thought, wait a second, like, it didn't really work out that much this time around. Like, should I try to break away from the pack and do something else. I think that was actually kind of a freaky decision for me at the time, but it really led me down this path of like getting closer and closer to what I think I really like. Um, During the time, I think it was a little bit controversial for sure, because all my friends were kind of on this path. But I did have, I think, a pretty good support system. Chris, now my fiance, really encouraged me to do it. Talked to a couple other friends who I think pushed me down the right path of, who cares what other people think? Who cares if this is like a lucrative career path? Um, like passion compounds the most. So you should just do what you think you want to do. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So the story and the vibe I'm getting from you is that among your peers in the banking world, actually you were an outlier. Like
Yes.
nobody
Yes.
nobody even thought to question is now I think an interesting question to ask then might be, is that because everyone loved it and so there would be no reason to question it? Or like why didn't they question it? You initially started by talking about this group of really ambitious, smart people. So what's going on then? Why is there no questioning? Is it because they loved it? Is it because why is that? That there's something puzzling about that.
Yeah. I think in general, it's just very scary to go against the crowd. I remember my friends would all get together, like the same group of banking friends, and everyone would complain about their jobs. Everyone would say, the long hours are difficult and the work isn't very fulfilling. And at the end of the day, everyone would go home and just like do it all over again. Um, I think it's very scary to be the first person among your peer group to try to do something like wildly different. Um, and there were like friends of friends who quit banking after 6 months or
Yeah.
who didn't even start their full-time banking offer. And I think looking back, those people had kind of like the conviction of independent thought a little bit more, and I really respect them. I think it took me 4 years to get there. In my mind, it felt like it was still quite early in my career, and there were still people going down this traditional path. Um, but I think for me, it took a little bit of courage to say, I do not want to follow this structure anymore, and I want to try something kind of out there.
So this is a story I've heard before, of course, like many, many times. One of the things I'll just say out loud, I find it really ironic that in principle, these are the people we might think coming out of an undergrad program who would be the most independent in their thinking, right? Who, with that ambition, like you would think these people might be, forging new paths that we haven't seen before. Except that the story you're telling me isn't that, right? It's really not that at all, actually, with the exception of, it sounds like it's an exception. Some people who didn't kind of hang out very long or didn't even start. But this wasn't the rule, right? And it certainly wasn't your environment by the time that you decided to roll off after 4 years, which is a reasonable amount of time actually to figure out whether this is for you or not, right? Um, and so I find that very ironic and very interesting, right? It raises all sorts of questions like, so are these people really the most independent? And if they're not, why aren't they? Because I thought that's kind of what we were all doing in school. And maybe that's
Yeah.
not true. But it's not, right? And I think I'd love to talk to you more a little bit about that. But before we get there, I want to kind of talk about what makes you different than in that moment. You basically went straight to the I have a support network answer, right? So you had a partner that really kind of encouraged you in that moment, which is great, right? We should all have that. And then you had other people in your life that apparently were not part of this world and maybe knew you well enough. I'm just making an assumption here to also encourage this. Looking back, do you feel like you needed that? Like if you didn't have that, would you basically be on the same road as the rest of your friends, another who knows how many years in?
Yeah, I think so. I think I needed someone to validate the fact that um, it was okay to want something that other than what the masses wanted. if that makes sense. And it was okay to give up kind of this objectively lucrative career. I think there's like once you kind of get in one of those seats, there's a bit of a scarcity mindset, I would
Yeah.
say. You know, like I have this opportunity, and because my resume looks like this, I'm one of the only people who can get this other thing. And, like it was so hard to get here, one in a thousand chance. Like it's mine to lose to not keep going, is how I felt the sentiment around me was a little bit. And it was also, you know, the fear of the unknown. Will I be good at learning a completely new thing? Um, but I think the like counter argument that I now see like very clearly is um like I think it's really important to do something that is both hard and that you think you're really good at every day. And if the like both of those things don't hold true, then like I don't think it's going to be like a breakout career. Um, so, even if my path is like this, I feel like the ultimate trajectory will be closer because I will get closer to the thing that I really want to do and I'm really good at versus I think if you kind of stay in one place, it's just like really hard for you to like get up and do something that you're like not super excited about every day.
Okay. Wait, but I want to make sure I heard you correctly because you said the two things that you feel like you need in a job. One, it's got to be hard. The second is you need to be good at it. But you didn't say you need to like it. Is that optional?
Mm, I think like is subjective. Some days I really like my job, but some days I think it's like tough. And that's probably because I'm like pushing myself and growing a lot every day. So some days I actually don't like it, but I know that it's hard and I think it's something that I'm good at.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can draw a conceptual distinction here, because this word like it, not like it is the English word is it's pretty vague, right? We say we like things, what does that mean? It is possible to actually love something but not like it every day, right? Let
I
me
think
just
so.
sort of propose that. Which means that there's two different levels, if you will, right? So there are absolutely, I think with people who love what they do, there will absolutely be days where there's like, oh, I don't really feel it today, right? That is different than kind of this deeper baseline, like I know why I'm doing this. Yes, it matters, like all this kind of stuff, right? And maybe the phrasing of it matters matters a lot, right? I'm using the word again in the same sentence to define it, but um, and so these are two different things. So I think you were answering the surface level, like, yeah, I don't necessarily like it every day. Sure, right? I don't think anything passes that bar. What about the deeper question? Like, does it need to be something that matters to you? Or can you just be good at it and can it just be hard? And then that's it.
Hmm. I think mission is really important. So yeah, to some like degree, I think it does definitely need to matter to you. But to your point, it means different things to different people, right? Like, does it matter because you're interested in the financial outcome? Nothing wrong with that. Does it matter because you like speak to the mission of what the company's doing, what your company's doing? Does it matter because you care about the people who work for you? I think those are all elements of it.
Yep.
Um, so I guess to your point, it's up to the definition. And I like how did the structure of how I think about like liking it, to your earlier point, Chris and I talk about this a lot. We talk about the difference between like type one fun and type two fun. Um,
Oh,
so
is that an official thing? Because I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, I think so. Let me look it up, but we use this like mental framework a lot. Like type one of fun is eating ice cream, going to the amusement park. It's something that I think in some ways to a mass group of people is supposed to be fun. And then type two fun is something that um, it's like climbing a mountain or skydiving or something that is probably scary and or like undesirable in the moment, but is fun afterwards. And I think we really equate that to work, where a lot of things that we do for our jobs, are difficult or scary, like going through it, but it's fun, like looking back, or it's fun when you complete it. So I think we're chasing like type 2 fun in our careers.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Um, wow, this discussion is getting philosophical pretty quick because there's a question of whether there's something even beyond type 1 and type 2 fun, right?
Hmm.
So when we talk about people who do very, let's say they're very mission driven, right? So let's say you work for, I'm making this up, right? I'm trying to make an example for this. You work for an NGO and you're working to in a foreign country where, just institutions are terrible and you're trying to help people meet basic needs, right? Um, in a lot of ways, this work is very likely to be never ending, right? And
Hmm.
it's not phenomenal odds of if what you're looking for is an outcome of overall success achievement. We wouldn't necessarily think that that's going to change the world right over there, what you're doing. And so if one were to go do that, is that type 1 fun? Well, probably not, one might think, right? Is it type
Probably.
2 fun? Well, you don't finish climbing the mountain. Maybe you get milestones along the way, but you're mostly just climbing the whole time. Um, so it may not be either, but then does that mean that it's not worth doing then, that you don't get anything out of it? And the answer to that might be no, otherwise no one would do it, right? So there might be something. I'm just throwing this out there. It's not a well-formed idea, but some people might be driven by something that's neither, I think, and then those might be the kinds of people that do these kinds of things, right? Because most people would look at that and say, "Well, you're clearly not getting the type 1 because we'd all rather eat ice cream. You're definitely unlikely to get the type 2. So then what are you doing there?"
I guess maybe your definition of like what the end of the mountain is could be the reason that people work at NGOs. Like maybe their mountain is they helped 10 people. Their mountain is they delivered X vaccines. So I guess the goal could be different from like different people. Like an example of type 2 fun that I had recently is for our company, we were figuring out like what is the best way to reach out to customers. And we went through a bunch of iterations. There were so many sleepless nights where we tried something, we worked really hard, we thought it would work, and it was a complete flop. But I think, looking back on the like 2, 3 months where we really tried to figure out the funnel, um, and now that we have like a good working funnel, it was like, oh, like that was actually really fun. Wasn't it funny that we thought this would work? Wasn't it funny when we tried this and we did nothing? Um, and I think those are like really, really fond core memories. But going through it, it was pretty terrible.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I can clearly see we're being pulled to talk about present day. I want to run this in chronology then to be respectful of kind of all the other experiences you've had along the way. So you had a turning point when you were in private equity. That turning point turned you away from the path I believe that many of your peers would have followed. Um, and then you essentially switched to corporate, right? Did I catch that right before? At a relatively senior level. What was that like? Because it's clear that that was part of a progression to kind of figure out that ultimately, and you should be on your own. But what's the story then? Why didn't it work?
Yeah. So I think I learned something at each place that I was able to work at, and I'm like really thankful for each step of the journey. The first, I guess, like operating role I worked at, I was on the strategic finance team of a 400-person startup. So I guess like startup is a word that we use loosely. It was just a growing company. And I went there and my assumption was now that I work at a company, like I will be able to like change the day to day. I will be so hands-on, it'll be very different from investing, which is very like high level. But I got there and I think it was, every division had a head of, and I had, 2 to 3 main projects that I worked on. And it was cross collaborative, but it just felt like I wasn't able to change as much as I wanted to. Um, because like that was kind of the nature of working at a 400-person startup, and I had no idea, right? Like it's a pretty established company by then, and there's processes for everything. Um, and it just like didn't feel like I was growing fast enough. So I left there pretty quickly. But definitely like on good terms. I think those are really great people. I tried my hand at working directly with a founder next. I joined a, like 150 person startup, just raised Series B. I was kind of the right hand of the founder. So that was really cool because now like you know, if I have a conversation with him and he thinks it's a good idea, then it happens tomorrow, sort of thing. So I really got what I wished for in the terms of being able to kind of positively impact the business. But I think the problem there was I was still just doing finance. Finance is really important, of course. We did a lot of like contract pricing, new customer calls, fundraising, managing the week to week, day to day of the business from like a P&L perspective. And then working really closely with different divisions on hiring and budget. So that was really great. And I stayed for a little bit, definitely longer than the previous role. But I found myself just like again thinking, oh, I just do finance, like I don't actually like make a new sale. I don't actually make the product. I'm kind of a connector or a first class support organization. But I don't like I don't move the business. So my next hypothesis was like, oh, let's go try to move the business. I joined at the time it was like 7 people startup that just raised seed. And I was their first business hire. So that was fun. That was really, really fun. And I was close to everything. I had like 10 roles. Um, there was no structure. If I wanted to do something, I had to like research how to do it and then do it myself. There were too many things to do and not enough hands to do it. And the startup is doing very, very well still today. So I think that's where I had the most fun, of any of the roles so far. So much so that I realized, like, hey, if I really like this, what's the next logical conclusion that I should just build my own company? Um, that was freaky because I think the shift from employee to founder is a really profound one. But I was really lucky that the founder of my previous startup was extremely supportive, and he's still one of my like really close friends today.
Wow. Okay. Okay, so that ended up being so far. I'll use the word conclusion, but you got a long way to go still. But conclusion of the story, at least up until now. I find it kind of interesting that you start as an undergrad, and let's say for the sake of argument that actually this was your destiny, right? Well, we can argue about this, right? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe this is just a product of this path. But part of the reason I'm using that word is hearing you talk, Samantha, about I'm just threading through what did I not like or what did I like about everything. There's a clear theme of need for autonomy. There's a clear theme of, yeah, maybe everybody's smart, but like the hierarchy is so severe, like it's unsatisfying in a very different way, right? And so it seems like there's this real kind of shift here, shift here, shift here to try to figure out what isn't gonna kind of be restrictive, shall we say, in the same way. And then you discover basically as you're taking the restrictions off, even at the very end where you're not that restricted relative to many other people in the working world, you found, well, actually, still the answer is, why don't I just do this myself? Could this all have been completely shortcutted and circumvented by just you studying entrepreneurship as an undergrad and then just doing that and doing a couple of years somewhere and then jumping off on your own? I wonder about that. I mean, there's a former podcast guest who basically from day one knew that's what he wanted to do, right? He's an MSc
Mm.
student. And so every work experience that he chose, right, every job that he chose was all about basically platforming and building, into that. And then as soon as he thought he was ready, he was gone, right? Your story is, it gets there, but it's not that way, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing intentional or deliberate from the beginning about that.
Yeah. I mean, if I wish I got to my mindset of like what I have now earlier. I think it would have really helped because I think this is closer to what I really want. But I think for me, I kind of needed to like go through the steps. I yeah, I think just thinking back to when you and I would chat in your office, like I really just didn't have any like fully formed thoughts about like what do I really like, what do I really not like. And I think it was the fact that I tried so many roles that I realized that I really need autonomy. I really need to kind of be able to push the ball forward. That's really motivating for me. Um, and that wasn't immediately clear to me. Like when I was an undergrad. I think I had to find that through iteration.
So now I'm going to ask you a very dangerous speculative question. One could argue that this could have all happened a lot faster. And feel free to disagree with me, by the way, when I finish saying this. I don't know what the right answer is here. But one could argue that this could have happened a lot faster if in undergrad there had been a reframing about how you're supposed to approach careers,
I think
right?
so.
Or even like someone sat down with you and said, all right, Samantha, we're just going to talk about you and what you care about. Forget about what anybody says. Let's figure out where your values might be. And if you had, even if it had been something as simple as taking an assessment that had clearly shown you value autonomy, that would have planted a seed for you to potentially think about that as a compass as you went through these things. Now, obviously, it did serve as a compass anyway, but in a trial and error sort of way, which is usually the most expensive way to figure out something about yourself, right? So it's just a question, right? I mean, feel free to tell me looking back, you're like, nah, I don't think I would have gotten there no matter what anyone was doing back there.
Mm, I think that I had to unprogram my brain for a lot of the constraints that I thought existed, kind of like in our traditional education system. So I think that's true. Um, I think one of the constraints is that some jobs are better than others, and that you should want some jobs more than you should want others. I think entrepreneurship is um, kind of it means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? You could be a small business cash flow entrepreneur, or you could be a venture-backed, multi-millionaire entrepreneur. Like both things exist, and I think they both are kind of labeled entrepreneurship. Um, but I think my perception of entrepreneurship in undergrad is that it was extremely risky. You needed to have an edge in what you were building. And you need to be kind of like the one person to succeed above all others. So, there's a lot of unsuccessful entrepreneurs. So is it better to just, go a little bit safer of a path and find something that is like traditionally successful and you could like on average make a lot of money? Like those are some of the things that I felt like were narratives in undergrad. Like entrepreneurship wasn't seen as necessarily like a great thing. It was maybe something you did if you, I hate to say this, but like couldn't find another job, you know? So I think just like unprogramming a lot of those thoughts that I had when I was 19, 20, and then just realizing, hey, like you don't need to put a label on it. Like this is what you want to do.
What is your perspective about it now, though? Because one could argue that a lot of the things that you just said that scared you away in undergrad are actually technically still true, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Or did you discover, I was like, oh, this isn't risky at all? Like, actually, everyone wins, right? Oh, I mean, not necessarily, right? So, but you've clearly changed because you're doing it and you're not doing it because you couldn't do something else. You're doing it because you want to. So, what's different now about the Samantha now compared to 22-year-old Samantha?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like appetite for risk and how I perceive risk. I think when I was a lot younger, risk was a bad thing. You shouldn't take a risk on your career. You shouldn't do risky things in general. But my perception now is squarely that, you don't deserve outsized reward if you don't take outsized risk. Like risk is a good thing. Risk is how you get ahead in life. So I think because entrepreneurship is risky, it also means that your upside is much, much higher. And that's actually the main reason, one of the main reasons why, even though I like really enjoyed my role at a really early stage startup, I still wanted to like make the switch to be a founder. It's much more risky, but your upside is basically unlimited.
For you to make that big a shift, though, right, Samantha, there had to be a moment or a real, like some. I, I bring this up because, for example, banking is not a risky career, actually. In
Oh,
fact, I remember when I was an intern long ago at JP Morgan before it became JP Morgan Chase. There was a guy who came by. I think he was one of the top 10 guys at Goldman to give a talk. And he said one of the best things about that career path, right? He had grown up in banking, was adjust it for risk.
oh,
It's just great compensation, right? So true, right? The whole point of doing that is that you don't take those risks. That's what entrepreneurs do and other people, but you can still make good money. So you didn't move from undergrad into an environment where it's like, oh, guys, let's think about risk differently. You moved into like, no, 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 we don't take risk, right? And even private equity, that was late stage private equity, which is far away from the riskiest part of private equity. So, but somehow you got that feeling somewhere. Where, or that idea, where did that come from? What was the moment?
yeah, I think maybe this is just like the way that my brain works. But I lean a lot into like pattern recognition. The people who are doing the best out of my friends and friends of friends are the people who took risk like very early on.
I
The people
see.
who didn't start their banking jobs, who quit after 6 months to pursue like an early stage startup. The people who, after 2 years of consulting, started their own company and now they're already exited. The pattern is like very clear to me that risk is positive.
Okay. All right. So yours is data driven. You just had to see that there were
Yeah.
people who walked off the reservation, so to speak, and suddenly started doing way better. And then you're like, wait a second. Okay. So it was only going to be a matter of time then before you ended up down this road. So now you're in the middle of your own startup. You're in a year and a half in. Um, tell me tell me about that. Like how was it in the beginning? I'm sure it was scary as it would be for any entrepreneur in the very beginning, despite the fact that you actually took many steps, baby steps to get to where you were. It wasn't like you just dove right in. Um, and what has that been like? Like, what's the growth process been like? How does it feel? Like, I'd be curious about any of it.
Yeah, I think like the last year and a half has felt like 5 years. Like I feel like I've lived so many lives. Which has been good, honestly. I think it made me try things that I wouldn't ever otherwise. And made me go through a lot of experiences that I feel like you wouldn't really get if you weren't on this entrepreneurship journey. My story since starting my own company is the original idea that I had for my startup was one that I got while I was working at the last company, the seed stage startup. We were basically using a vendor for a really core business process, and the vendor was extremely well capitalized. We paid them a lot of money, but the process like didn't really work. And it was kind of my job to manage the vendor and get the process to work. I dug super deep into why it didn't work. And it was basically because they weren't automating a lot of the process. They were using like offshore teams, in India and the Philippines. Um, and that seemed a little bit odd because, we have software, we have AI now. So I basically told the founder that I was working for, like, hey, if I build this better, will you switch your business over to my not formed company? Um, and to my surprise, he said yes. So I actually launched my startup with a customer. And we were kind of doing everything by hand at first, but I recruited one of my good friends to be my CTO. We had like a product up in a month, like an MVP. And we were kind of like rocking and rolling. the process that we were solving for was actually pretty core to a lot of healthcare tech companies. So just by word of mouth, we got like two more customers. And then with that, like really early traction in that small amount of time, we were able to get into Y Combinator, which is like an accelerator for startups. Um, so that really kind of put some, um, like wind in our sails. We moved pretty quickly. And then we went through the accelerator summer of last year, which was a really great experience, I think. It was really cool to be just close to a lot of just like the who's who in Silicon Valley and tech. It really made me feel like we could build a big company. And then afterwards, unfortunately, there was a lot of disagreement between my co-founder and I. And then we actually went through a separation. So he departed from the business. That was a very low point. We were friends for 15 years. We
Mm.
built together for a whole year. Um, but I think kind of like bounced back from that, found a new co-founder that I work very well with now. And we also pivoted the idea. So we used to build for kind of like a B2B function, and now we've pivoted to basically use our own B2B product that we built in order to build like a B2C practice. And I'm happy to go more into that, but basically, like in the last 15 months, I've started a company, went through an accelerator. Um, Unfortunately, parted ways with my first co-founders, found a new co-founder, and then like dramatically pivoted the business. So it's been fun. Yeah, I've been busy.
Yeah, I appreciate the update. That actually is a much more gives a much better idea of what you've been up to, at least as of late. Um, I feel like we've been building the suspense of, like, how would you describe to people who are not in your industry or your business what it is exactly that your company does now?
Yeah. So right now, we are a platform for patients to match with advocates. So think of advocates as a healthcare personal assistant, someone who can help you fill out forms, schedule appointments, explain your benefits, find transportation, basically anything you need to do to like navigate the healthcare system. We have a platform that kind of pairs patients and advocates. And what's really cool about our platform is one, it's actually reimbursable by Medicare. So some new CPT codes or like kind of like healthcare codes came out in 2024 that allows patients with Medicare to receive advocacy services as a reimbursable benefit. So it's actually free for most of our patients. And then what we do is basically we pair the patients with the advocates, and then we also arm the advocates with a lot of tools that they need to kind of do their job. Um, Advocacy, like at a high level, is just, I think, a very complicated like search problem, and then it's an execution problem. So maybe patient will say something like, "Hey, I live in rural Texas, and I have no way to get to my doctor's appointment in 2 weeks." The advocate would look for medical transportation in the area. What we do is we use AI to kind of document all of the notes, calls, resources that all of our advocates collectively gather. We put them in kind of one centralized database, and then we use AI to surface like the best recommendation for the next patient. So our AI might say like, hey, 2 weeks ago, this other patient also required transportation in this zip code, and this was the person they contacted, and this is how they got that. Um, so our AI will help advocates find the best resources, and then also we're developing ways to help advocates kind of execute on that as well. So do emails, faxes, phone calls in order to get the kind of like the tasks done for the patients.
Okay. And for those of us who are not that familiar with advocates, you actually did give one specific example, but generally speaking, why do advocates exist? What are the types of patients or conditions that one might need an advocate for those of the rest of us who may not be having one?
Yeah. So I think that think of an advocate as just like someone who can help you with your healthcare journey. A lot of us are actually like unofficial advocates, you know? If your parents reach out to you because they want you to help make an appointment for them because they don't know how to use the web portal. Like you're being an advocate for them. Um, a lot of spouses advocate for another spouse when they are like not feeling well. So it's not like a hard and fast rule of like what the relationship is. It's more just like someone who kind of helps you on your healthcare journey. Our advocates just tend to be like kind of like professionals at it. They have healthcare backgrounds. This is their passion. They love helping people. The types of conditions we mostly help with are we have a wide list, but chronic conditions, a lot of folks with mobility issues or disabilities, different like memory issues. Those are some like large categories. But anyone can really benefit from an advocate.
I see. Okay. And so an advocate is not necessarily a nurse or a doctor, but a professional who sort of knows how to get stuff done in the system.
Exactly. Yeah. Not a clinician by a hard and fast rule, but someone who is good at navigating the healthcare system.
Okay. I'm assuming this is very much a growing industry at the moment.
Yeah, I think ever since the new healthcare codes came out that made this reimbursable, it's been I think something that's been front and center in a lot of people's minds. The like number one reason that people not number one, maybe the stat is 72% of American adults do not know how to navigate their benefits. And we really see this because a large percentage of like hospital room visit, sorry, emergency room visits actually are not for emergencies. They're because patients can't get a medication or patients can't get in touch with their PCP. It's like very, very administrative based things that present in the ER. So our practice really helps like combat those kind of questions so that the ER resources and more emergency resources are being used for emergency level needs.
I see. Okay. No, this all, I mean, any of us in the United States who have to deal with the healthcare system can easily imagine sort of the complexity that comes with this, right? And why so many ER visits, which I did not know until you told me, actually wouldn't be what you would think, right? They're the result of these kind of administrative failures, actually, to be frank, right? So
Yeah.
so you've got this going on. Interesting. So in your case, it sounds like the mission actually, or the business actually has a mission, right? There's a
Yeah.
what one could frame this as, we're actually trying to improve health outcomes,
Yes.
right, in some ways, because search costs are such an awful part of the existing structure in the system. And so that's obviously part of your thesis. You're nodding your head vigorously. So sure, um,
Yes.
this all makes sense. Um, when you hire for your business, you're a year and a half in. So I almost feel like it's unfair to even ask you this question because I feel like, of course, you're figuring this out. But does it matter to you that people care about the mission, or does it matter to you more that they're just really good at what they do, or that they know like how to do it, or they've worked somewhere that would mean that they've got certain kinds of experience? Like what are you looking for?
Yeah. I think that's a hard question to answer. I think maybe ideally both, but
Sure.
um, I really want people who are mission driven to join our business. I think mission is what makes people like get up in the morning and feel excited to go to work, and mission is what makes them like have a great attitude and go above and beyond. Um, I think unfortunately, because we are like quite small at the moment, it is really important that people can ramp up quickly and are able to do the role with kind of like minimal oversight. So I think in our current screening process, if you are joining as an advocate, we require that you basically have one-to-one experience being an advocate in like another setting. But I think as we grow, the most important thing is kind of like mission alignment. I think that people who want to be there and who want to help patients are the people who are going to do the best for us in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would Yeah, I'll put my professor hat on. That would be exactly what one would think, right, for a business like this. Um, Depending on what kind of business you want to create. There are actually other people who create businesses in healthcare that are not at all mission driven, and they are also profitable, but they tend to collect a certain ire from people because they don't have those same motivations. So,
Yeah.
um, Samantha, we haven't chatted in a long time. I really appreciate you sharing your whole story. What are things that you wish maybe we would have? This goes back to if we had had something in school, would it have helped you? What do you wish that we would have given you or told you or just provided that we clearly didn't? Or maybe worse than not just provided, maybe we told you something that has hurt you along the way, or didn't help. I think you've actually essentially said that's happened. But I don't want to take it that far. Just, I would be very curious kind of how you reflect on it and what you think about it, honestly.
Yeah. Mm, I think it's not the professors or any one person. I think it's just the education, like undergrad education system for Ivy. When I went through it was there was a clear force ranking of success, which I think does not align with how the real world works. Um, but like that's something that I don't know, like I had to unlearn through experience. I think I actually remember really clearly something that you said in class once, and I use this as kind of like a mental framework. You were talking about how the most successful person in your undergraduate class wasn't the person that you thought it would be. Like you were talking about an archetype of someone who got a really good job and, like had really good grades, and everyone was like, ah, like this is the person who's going to succeed. It wasn't that person. It was actually another person, I think your friend, who was just really into airplanes, I believe. And then he went on to be like a very senior executive,
Yep.
you know. So I think it didn't really hit home for me at the moment, but I was like, oh, that's a really interesting anecdote. Like, I wonder why that is, because everyone's trying to be the first type of person, right? Um, but the reason that is because I think passion compounds, like interest compounds, and you can only force yourself to do something for so long if you don't actually like it. Careers are so long. People who started off like really hot in the careers, some of them are, I don't know, just like coming along, and people who like I didn't know in Ivy or weren't on anyone's radar are doing extremely well kind of right now because I think they found their passion somewhere along the way. So I think it would be hard to get into the heads of some 20-year-olds, but it's really like what you like, what you're good at, doing hard things. Like these are the important things. Like remove all the labels and all the um like extraneous things from your decision making and just ask yourself, like what am I really good at? What can I really do? Um, yeah.
And that would be the big thing. Um, yeah. Yeah. There are people debate about this because I think, so Samantha, you're originally of Chinese origin. I'm originally of Korean origin. I think there are plenty of people back in the old countries that don't agree with this. Um, Let me make this concrete. So you may or may not have heard of her, but for a period of time in the world, arguably one of the best figure skaters at that time was a Korean girl named Yuna Kim, right? So she was an Olympic athlete. She won medals and, did really well. I don't know anything about figure skating, but I remember when I was at Ivy, actually, she came to London because there was at that time, the World Figure Skating Championships for some reason decided to locate in London. And so I ended up going to the only figure skating competition, I guess is the right word, that I've ever been to in my life. And I saw her and I saw everybody else. Knowing nothing about figure skating, it was actually extremely obvious she was better than everyone else, just like technically. But the thing that it was very easy, at least for me to tell, which I was kind of surprised. I don't think anybody else noticed. There was no joy in it. It was like perfect execution with that. And not surprisingly, after the last Olympics that she competed in, where she didn't get the gold, I think, and there's a whole scandal around that, or controversy. I'll also use the word controversy about whether that was fairly done or not. She quits and she has never picked up skates again, right? Which is exactly what I would have predicted given what I saw, right?
Mm.
The stunning part to me was how far she got
Yeah.
not liking it, right?
Yeah.
That was truly, I mean, you really can get to become the best in the world at something, I guess, and hate it sometimes. But wow, what a miserable path. And then wow, she probably couldn't wait to throw those skates away as soon as she finally decided, right? And has never gone back since. So I bring that up because when I have brought up very few times that story as an example before to someone like, for example, my parents, they will actually view that as a success story. That
Mm.
that the model worked really well. I'm like, how can you say that given the outcome? And what they'll point to is how far she actually succeeded to get to that point, right? And the endorsements and all that other stuff that happens afterwards. And that's true, right? That's true. And I look at what happened afterwards, I'm like, and as well as how I could clearly tell she felt while performing phenomenally well. And it's difficult for me to get on board with that, right? And say that that's the best that people can do. So I feel like as much as you and I can have this conversation, right? And I really appreciate that we can have this after you've gone through a nice long path here to take you to these answers, right? Because 22-year-old Samantha, to be honest, I think you were ripe for it, but there just weren't those experiences to give you the lessons that you would have needed to get to where you are at the moment, right? As you said, you had to unlearn a lot of stuff. Um, but there are people out there, I think, who have a different way of thinking about this. And part of me is sort of suspicious that your peers in banking, who are probably well on their way, still on those very predictable paths, might still be of that mindset. Or I don't know. Maybe they're unhappy, but they're too scared to go do something else. I don't actually know, because I've gotten that phone call before too from former students.
Mm.
And I can tell you all of those people, after a certain length of time, continue on those paths no matter how much they hate it. And so I wonder what you think about all that. Like, what would be your thoughts and reactions?
Yeah, I get those calls as well, of people who kind of want to veer off the path and they're like, "Oh, but I'm so scared. Like, should I do it? Should I not?" I definitely tell them that I'm enjoying it a lot more. Like the highs are high, but the lows are low. But I feel like I'm getting closer to what I need to do and like having just like a lot of memories on the way. So it makes like I think life a lot more colorful. So that's my first point. And I think the second point is I think Elon Musk said this as well, but it's like not actually as risky as you think it is in your head, right? There's a lot of, people, very high functioning people who are unemployed right now. Like you're not going to, I don't know, like die from exposure. Like you're gonna have a house, like your friends are gonna accept you. The ones who don't accept you, I think maybe aren't worth being friends if they don't accept you through your highs and lows. And it's going to be a change, but after you make that change, I think you're going to see a lot of clarity. And nothing is a one-way door. I think if you, I don't know, like tried something very different and you learned a lot about yourself, you can always go back to what you were doing before. Maybe it'll take a little bit of work and a little bit of recruiting, but I feel like nothing in a career is a one-way door unless, you do something wrong. But like it's not wrong to explore. So, like, I think those are kind of the ways that I help try to contextualize that, it's it's actually less risky to try, because I think it's very difficult to live with regret, when you get a little bit older. Um, I think we're getting to the age now where people are settling down, buying homes, thinking about starting a family. So there is like a lot more structure in people's lives. So I always tell people like I wish I did this sooner. I wish I had I wish I was a couple more years younger when I started my business, but like I am here now. Yeah, so it's really not as risky as you think it is.
Ah, okay. No, I appreciate you saying that. So, and you wish you had done this sooner. So it's not the opposite. It's not, this is really hard. It's not for everyone. Like, I'm not sure I'd recommend this to everybody. Sometimes people will say that about a particular path that they've chosen. Um, but that's not how you feel, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm an advocate for just trying. Just do it, you know? And there are friends that in my YC batch that started their company about the same time as me and they're like back working. They actually have better roles than they did when they left. Because I think you get a lot of like emotional clarity after you've tried something and you know it's not for you. My one of my close friends was an entrepreneur and now she works a corporate job. And she says that she now feels that she has less anxiety day to day because it's like she's not responsible for making the company run. The company is a very large corporation that's like cash flow positive and it's going to be around if she only gives 50% effort on a day-to-day basis. And she said that like she would never have this emotional clarity if she didn't start her own business and like really see what it's like to be the only person there. So it actually like helps her perform better as a corporate employee, because she has this entrepreneurship experience. So no one-way doors.
Do you think, just kind of thinking about your path and the story that you've told me, it did seem like at certain points having support helped or may have made the difference, right? I mean, we'll never really know for sure, but at least it helped a lot in your case, particularly in your private equity story, right?
Yeah.
But maybe even your startup story, when you're working at the startup, you sort of had your first customer before you even had anything, right? That's
Yeah.
unusual.
Yeah.
So in some sense, you were supported at certain points that would have been really important.
For sure.
Do you do you think that's the difference between you and maybe some of your peers who just couldn't get off the train? Or do you think actually there's a personality difference? Is it really risk tolerance, fear? Is it other kinds of beliefs? What would you say it is?
I think the support system is like a big thing for sure. Chris, is very risk tolerant. I think that that influenced me over our now 10-year relationship. Um, yeah, I think you're always like a blend of your five closest friends. So I'm very fortunate that the people that I have around me are very open-minded. Um, I'm fortunate that my parents are pretty chill. So those are all things that I think led to where I could be today.
Got it. But then just to push on that a little bit, the people that you know who really could have done in their version of what you did, but didn't, do you think it's the lack of a support network that did it for them, or were there other things you think? And I know we're just speculating here, because I find it fascinating why some people do this, and I'm really glad you did, by the way, Samantha, right? Um, even as an undergrad, I did have a feeling that purely traditional path wasn't gonna, at least it
Interesting.
wouldn't have been, it was not gonna be the fulfilling road, at least. Um, and I wouldn't want you to end up like Yuna Kim, right? Even with all the success. So I'm really glad you did, but I don't know if it's more accurate to say that you're the exception or the rule. I might be biased to say you're the exception, that most of your peers going through this, they just don't, not for lack of intellect, not because they're not capable, um, but they don't, and not because of lack of desire, even, right? I can argue that even, but they don't. And it's an interesting question to think about. Well, why is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one dimension is just, you know, I think we're for just like let's take banking. Like I think banking is hard. And people in general say they're neutral or don't enjoy it. But what is like the magnitude of your like lack of satisfaction? And what's your tolerance to that? Um, I think there's some people who maybe just complain about it because it's like what people complain about. But if they go home at the end of the day and they like reflect before going to sleep, it's fine. And I'm really like happy for those people. Um, so it's just like what you want in your heart of hearts. I think is one component. Yeah, and I think the other component is just like hearing the right narratives at the right point in your life when you're making a big decision. Um, I try to take calls from people who are making big career changes because I think it's really important to hear someone who is very supportive of big career pivots. Um, to your point, if they don't have someone like that close by, um, maybe they're very in their head about like, hey, this is big risk. My friends disapprove. But it helps to hear, one person like give encouragement to do this. So definitely a lot of luck involved, for sure. But I think for me it was I had conviction in what I didn't like high conviction, and then had good people around me.
I see. So this sense of a very strong sense of knowing, and then just enough people to help you take that first step. I guess sounds like it would be the big difference. And maybe that's why it's different between you and some others. And maybe they don't hate it as much or didn't, or it wasn't as poor a fit. I don't want to say hate it as much. But so I can see that these would make a big difference. So Samantha, you're getting to a point where at some point you're going to be eligible to go back and teach something at a university, maybe even your alma mater. What would you want to teach? Like, would you go back and teach finance? Would that be kind of your big thing to go
Ooh.
back and do, or what would you want to say to a bunch of 21, 20? Because I'm going to bet you anything they're going to be just like you were. I don't think the system has changed even a little bit since you've gone through, so you will know exactly what's going on in their heads.
Yeah, I think I would start off by saying like calling out some of the perceptions that I thought existed um in undergrad to see if it still resonates, right? Because maybe rightly or wrongly, like when I was in undergrad, um, I was like, oh, like the teachers don't get it. They don't understand that there's so much pressure to do recruiting, and they don't understand that the best banks are blah 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 blah, and like they're not like in the know. So if your professors are not in the know, then they won't have like their guidance won't be like one to one to what you need to accomplish. So maybe I would start off by saying like, hey, like I know that recruiting is tough. I know that, there are certain jobs that appear more desirable than others at face value at this point in time. I know that there's a lot of, yeah, just like social pressure. Um, but then kind of like tell them about the success stories of people who have like very unconventional paths. And basically just like really reiterate that being unconventional is positive. I think net positive. Taking risk is net positive. Um, everyone starts like somewhere, but like the paths are like wildly divergent, right? Um, your starting point does not determine your success in your career. Um, yeah, and it's like it's a long game, so think about what game you want to play. Like those are, I think, the thesis points I would want to get across.
Yeah. None of what you heard, by the way. Is that fair to say when you were going through?
I think you were the closest one to telling me those things, but probably should have been hit home more.
Yeah. And I did that, what, at the final 30 to 45 minutes of the last class, and the subject matter I teach wasn't even this. So I don't even know if that, I mean, if that was the best you got or the closest, that's a kind of tragic commentary about how that works. You took a class called Career Management, right? I mean, one would have thought that title might have taken you in a different direction, right? But it is what it is. And it matches everything else that I hear everywhere else, hardly unique to Ivy. So um, I'm going to ask you a few more things. Samantha, how important is money to you, or was money throughout this process? Because that is partly what stops people, right? From, particularly if you're in a senior level, so whether it's in finance or whether it's in corporate, I mean, that's a different road and path to what some people might call success, right? Versus going off and trying to start your own thing. Now, obviously, based on what you told me, a lot of it was kind of personality driven. Like you just have certain values and you want things a certain way to match you. Did the money aspect of it make that a harder decision or not? Was that not really as important to you because you had actually seen what the price of money actually was in the context you'd been in? How did you think about that?
Yeah, I think I was too early in my career to have real golden handcuffs, which I'm like very fortunate by. But I think it's important for me to make money. Um, and the way that I thought about it was like if I force myself to stay in private equity, um, you would make, more and more money each step. But the real, I guess, like the last step is worth the most, right? Can you make partner? I just didn't have conviction in the fact that like I could make partner because there were people around me that I felt like genuinely loved the job and they didn't mind the hours and they would like stay up and read 10Ks of competitor like companies at night and they like love to follow their portfolio companies like not even for work and it's like their passion like taught me that I couldn't outcompete with them like for partner. So if my goal was to make money, this wasn't actually the best way, right? Because the real like prize was hard to obtain for me, even from a monetary perspective. Um, so now I'm in my own startup, I am definitely like financially driven. And I think that, if I do really well, then there's a lot of upside for me. And I think this is like my game that I could play with my career that maximizes like my chances of financial success.
Got it. Because is it fair to say when you went to Y Combinator, you did not see other entrepreneurs who loved what they did more than how you feel about what you're doing? Is that right? To draw the analogy to your private equity story.
I think the interesting thing about like being a founder is that you can actually be very good friends with other founders. I think there's a lot of capital out there. I don't actually think it's like very PvP, unlike when you're working at a firm and there's five associates, there's only two promotion spots. Um, yeah, I think being a founder is actually really nice because I think all my founder firms can win, and I actually want them all to win because then they could like help me with my next round or whatever. Um, but I just feel like this is the spot in my career where I can like maximize my chances of financial success.
Okay. And interestingly enough, I mean, you're framing this in a very strategic, kind of rational way, but it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, Samantha, by factoring in kind of how much you like it, right? Um,
Yeah, I think it's hard to be good at something if you don't like it and or feel like you're good at it. I think that this is something that I can do and get up every day and do. And that's really, really important.
yeah, yeah. What what do you see to the extent, I mean, you've described a story in the last year and a half that makes my next question seem almost silly because I don't know that there is a way you would know this, but what do you see coming up for you?
In an ideal scenario, we like really hit our stride with the business and we're able to scale. I think that we're building something that's like very important and I think should exist in a very large scale in the US. So ideally, I'm looking forward to um, raising more capital, getting the right employees on board, building a platform and helping more patients.
Okay. Great answer. Let's say that all happens. Longer term, Samantha, you're going to live a pretty long life here, right? We only talked about the quarter life crisis. You're not even at the midlife crisis yet, right? So do you already have some ideas about kind of longer term what you might want to do, or is it just this? Like you want to just see this all the way to fruition and then you'll figure out what to do next?
Yeah, I want to see how big we can grow this business. I
Okay.
think that's it's hard to see like so many years in advance now. When I was more on the career track, it was next 2 years I'm going to do this, next 2 years I'm going to do that. I don't really even have visibility into like a couple months from now because things just change so quickly. But yeah, I think the long-term goal right now is just to build a really big sustainable business.
And what do you see? So everyone is thinking about AI as you know at the moment. You actually have a business that incorporates AI, right? While the rest of us are trying to figure out what we're supposed to do about AI, right? Or use it, I guess. What do you see happening with AI? Like, what are things that you feel like you could probably say with confidence you think will happen, other than the fact we're all going to use it? I think that's a given. But I think where people are struggling now is to understand, well, what does that actually mean for my day-to-day life, right? Is there anything that you're seeing so far that you're like, oh, I think this is going to happen?
Yeah, I think with I can say this. I'm quite certain about this because we're seeing this in our business already, but there's going to be a like net shrinkage in the number of entry and mid-level call it like corporate white collar roles in the next like 5 to 10 years. So I think the shape of the labor market is going to change. There's going to be just like fewer roles for people to get into in, say, like engineering. So it's going to be hard for you to be like a experienced engineer because the pool of like where you can start is much smaller. This is like very true for us because we use like AI tools to code, and we have an engineering team of two that my co-founder used to work at a big tech company. He was like, we're easily doing the work of 4 to 5 people with the use of AI tools. And he's like, I would rather tell Cursor to do something than a junior engineer because Cursor responds right away and doesn't give me attitude and works 24 hours a day. So we're like already seeing this. And I think there was something that someone posted about like the number of entry-level roles in LinkedIn, like really shrinking year over year. So I think it's going to be tougher to get your hands on a like corporate role in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think maybe um, like trades, like and other like physical work could be more valuable if you're like just trying to start out. But yeah, I think you can build bigger companies with way less headcount because of AI.
Which is what I was worried you were going to say. Because in my business, what we worry about is, well, who hires college graduates then, right? Um,
Yeah.
or fresh MBAs even, right? Which aren't that much further up the ladder. Do you have any thoughts on that, or are we basically screwed in our industry? Which is
Uh,
okay. Feel free to tell me exactly what you think.
no, I think there's like a wide open lane for entrepreneurship because you can do a lot of things yourself now. Um, I think I could never code before, but I can tell AI to make a website now. I think if you are a new grad and like you don't really know what you're doing, or like this happens, you're like not able to get a role. Just think about like building something. I think the barriers to building have never been lower. I also think that um, if we're talking about social hierarchy, it's actually quite cool to be a founder now. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more people who are kind of like not working for like a corporation going forward.
So, explosion of entrepreneurship, basically
Yeah.
enabled by AI, is the world that you see. I'll just be candid and say the following out loud. So, certainly entrepreneurship is a growing area inside business schools, but if I look at startups and successful startups, like how many of them were founded by an undergrad who majored in entrepreneurship? I'm not sure I see a whole lot, to be honest. Um, which makes me wonder then, like what exactly would a business school do? Like, I could see that an engineering school or a computer science department, maybe that's what they would start gearing for. It's just like, hey guys, go make your own AI startup, and then we've given you those skills. A business school, on the other hand, typically is looking to place people at the entry level or at the bottom of a hierarchy, like a bank, right? Or a big Fortune 500 or something, or in consulting, um, which also will change with AI, and that's a whole separate thing. But I think I am not entirely sure what exactly we would do given the changes that you're talking about, which I absolutely have been seeing also. The entry level and even some of the mid level, which is scary because the better that AI gets, it keeps moving up levels, right? What do you think we'd do? This is related to you going back and teaching at your alma mater because there's not going to be anything to teach at if it turns out there's nothing left.
Yeah, I don't know. I This is unconventional, but I think it's important to get like hard skills. I think I don't know. Business school, um I mean, I think business school gives a lot of intangible things. Like I have really close friends who went through it and they've met people that they wouldn't meet otherwise, and that's led to opportunities for sure. But yeah, in terms of like what you can do with your t two hands that you couldn't do before, yeah, I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky.
Got it. Okay, but the one thing to hang on to there, the one ray of hope that you just mentioned is basically networks.
Yeah.
So so business school is essentially like a country club that you can join and then graduate from. We'll just call it a degree program, and then you can have some fun while you're here, and then hopefully you make enough friends that you thought it was worth your while to, because we know networks matter.
Yeah. Networks matter a lot. I have a lot of friends who met their significant other in business school, so that's a big life upgrade, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that is just asking to be disrupted if that's all it is. But because you can make a country club, right? You don't need to have a an entire university infrastructure for that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it was when I was thinking about like life paths, that was my thought. Yeah.
Okay. Um, wow, that was actually a much darker note than I thought this was going to be on. I thought the AI question was just a throwaway freebie at the end, but actually that sort of paints something really dramatic coming. You said 5 to 10 years, so we have a time frame, and these shifts are happening already. Let me throw something out as a possibility, and then tell me whether you think this matches with what you're seeing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. There is a line of thinking currently in certainly our business school, but probably all the business schools, because there's a question, well, what do we do now, right? And one is that we basically train people to manage agents,
Hmm.
right? Since and that the question is, of course, how do we do that when none of us have got a PhD in managing agents, right? Or like, how would we even go about doing that when we don't even know what people are doing 100% with agents or not? What would you think about that? Or do you think actually there isn't a set structure and that this really comes down to some people have a knack for it, some people don't, which might be something like sales, for example. So, Samantha, business schools don't have sales programs by and large either. And we think about if you think about like a really great salesperson, how much of that could you teach in a university type of format? My personal opinion, the answer is you can teach almost none of it, right? Like that's part of the reason why you don't, even though it's an extremely valuable skill, right? We all want to have phenomenal sales skills. And I think that's part of the reason why you just don't really see it, right? And in business schools, my personal opinion. So I'm a little worried that AI agent management is a little bit like that, that we can't actually train well for it, but there's going to be some superstars at it and people will just hire them. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of to the same shape of thought. Just like getting closer to like how the work is done today. I think being able to use AI efficiently is more and more just like a core requirement, I think, for a lot of these roles. And if you don't use it, you're kind of falling behind. So like how can you get the students as ready for that as possible, I think is really important. Like another thought along those lines is like there's another university in Canada, Waterloo, and I have a bunch of friends from there. Their structure is they basically just ship the kids off and try to get them as many internships as possible. And the school has like a really wide network of like incentives and subsidies. And I think it's like a very different like undergrad experience than what I had, but it sounds very valuable because by the time they graduate, they have 4 to 5 internships. Some are like barely paid, but I think it just like really shows you like what is like the shape of the work in a company like today. And I think those lessons are like very, very valuable. Um, so yeah, as like anything that you can get to get closer to like the shape of the work as it really is.
Got it. So almost more like vocational trades apprenticeship kind of stuff as opposed to sitting in a classroom with a PhD educated prof on a subject matter learning theory about, I don't know, traditional subjects like economics or leadership or things like that.
Yeah, I think, but if you can help with the like philosophy of like, this is your career path, it's not rigid. Like, I think that would actually be really, really helpful to like learn at a younger age.
Yeah. Yeah. Samantha, I really appreciate this. You taking the time to tell your whole story, and it sounds like you've. I'm always a little bit nervous, by the way, when I do these because you're not the first former student where it's been like a multi-year gap, which means actually, in theory, anything is possible,
Uh,
right? And then, of course, the story is what it is. I don't know what it's ever going to be, but I'm really happy to hear that yours is clearly one of a progression towards a place that ultimately is going to be better than where you were at before, right? I mean that's very evident. There's outcome, but then there's also like direction and path, right? And it's really clear hearing you talk and kind of why you did the things you did and what you learned along the way that there's a really nice story here. And we'll obviously see where it goes in the next 10 plus years, but these stories end up being what really defines a life, right? More than the dollars in the bank account, right? And more than a lot of these things. And that becomes more evident as you get older. I didn't think about this at all when I was teaching you when you were an undergrad, but now I can say like these stories actually end up being the stuff that really matters more than these other things, as well as the people around you, right? Which sounds like you have that going for you too. So thanks again. I really
yeah,
appreciate this.
for sure. It was really good to see you.